My guest today is Dr. Ned Ketyer. He's a retired pediatrician as well as a member and president-elect of Physicians for Social Responsibility Pennsylvania, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to public health, environmental, and climate advocacy. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak with him today. Dr. Ketyer, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Dylan. I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome. I'm very excited to jump into our discussion. So I primarily want to focus today on the solutions to these prevalent issues that we're facing regarding the environment and climate change and, of course, public health as well. And refrain from dwelling on, I don't know, though it may be tempting, like specific culprits, if you will, because I'd rather not have the entire subtext of our conversation be an overwhelming sense of complicity directed at particular group of people, but instead have this be treated as a human issue instead of a political issue. And when we spoke before, you were in agreement with that. I also think it would be beneficial to talk about a lot of these concepts from a very basic level of understanding so that everyone listening to this can benefit and learn some new things. And my intention is not to sound irreverent or anything when doing it that way and phrasing things very simply, but let's just say I want to play devil's advocate, I suppose, because my goal is always to be impartial and just treat every issue with the same amount of critical analysis. And I want to understand the many aspects of what's going on with climate change and the science behind it. And I think you're the perfect person to have on to ask those questions. So again, I really appreciate you being here. But before we get into that, let's start by hearing what your background is and what inspired your passion for environmental and climate advocacy.
Well, I am a retired pediatrician now. I retired from clinical practice about 4 years ago. A physical disability forced me into an early retirement. Fortunately, when I retired, I had a bunch of acquaintances in the environmental advocacy field here in the Pittsburgh area. It's actually a pretty large environmental community that we have here. And they said, well, if you're going to retire, we'll keep you busy. And I've certainly been very busy since then. I've always had a passion for environment, for nature, which is interesting because I grew up in industrial New Jersey, where there were lots of factories and refineries and stinky air and a lot of smog growing up, a lot of pollution. And, when you're a young boy growing up in industrial New Jersey, the one goal in life is to get the heck out of there. And I did. I went to college in Vermont, which is a very environmentally conscious state. And while I always appreciated the great outdoors, that really was an important place for me to be during those years. I went to medical school. I started medical school in the Philippines, in Manila, which is, at least it was when I was there, probably the filthiest place that I'd ever been to. A place, by the way, I love. I love the Philippines. I love Manila. I love the people. It was a wonderful experience, but nevertheless, the environment was not clean, and I saw how people suffered as a result. I finished my studies, my medical studies in Chicago at Northwestern University, and Chicago is just a wonderful city. Again, probably my favorite American city. And then I came to Pittsburgh to do my residency, which has a long history of environmental legacy pollution. A long history. I'm sure as an American, most people would be aware of that history. Dark soot in the middle of the day from all the coal being burned and all the steel being made. Things have changed a lot here, but we still have a lot of challenges here in the city and in the surrounding counties of Pennsylvania. And we have new filthy industries that have come online that are creating continued challenges for health. I went into pediatrics because children have their whole lives ahead of them. And I'm a believer that a lot of health problems, a lot of disability can be avoided, can be prevented through preventive measures. And so that's why I found a home here with a lot of environmental health challenges, but a lot of opportunities to find those solutions that you were talking about before, and using those solutions to affect positive change.
That's really inspiring, and I commend you for all of those initiatives. So I want to begin with, like you said, those solutions and the movement away from fossil fuels, which is what you mentioned before when we spoke earlier, and specifically the different forms of renewable energy that can potentially replace them. So I did some research, and according to the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, as of 2018, globally, roughly 26% of our electricity is generated using renewable energy. And according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, they say that 17% of the energy in the United States is renewable as of 2019. And correct me if I'm wrong. I made sure that those are credible sources. So even increasing this to 40 or potentially 50, let alone 100% in the next few decades seems like it's quite bold. So what do you think needs to happen in order to get that percentage much higher?
When we talk about renewables, we're talking about primarily solar and primarily wind. There are others. There's geothermal, there's hydro power, there's tidal energy, taking the sea currents and waves and using that for electricity generation. There are a lot of things that we already have the technology that are carbon free. But what we never talk about is conservation of energy, is energy efficiency, is insulating homes and businesses in using less energy. The assumption that everything is going to be the same, that we're going to continue to require this much energy to run our lives, I think is a false idea. We don't need this much energy. We can use considerably less energy. And if conservation wasn't a four-letter word in some circles, I think that we really could do well. Some other things to consider is, then again, this is a transition. Nobody is saying you need to stop eating hamburgers today. Nobody's saying you have to start driving an electric vehicle today. Nobody's saying that we're going to turn on a switch and you're not going to be able to heat your house on a cold winter day. That's not correct thinking. That's not the way we should be thinking. Now, I live in southwestern Pennsylvania. It tends to be cloudy a lot. We have some pretty good winds going on here. Solar does work in cloudy environments, but certainly it's not as efficient as places in the South, for instance, like Florida. And people have to understand that what we need to do is reduce carbon output. We need to reduce carbon dioxide and methane emissions. No one expects to stop carbon emissions today. So we should be looking for solutions where the sun shines a lot, where the wind blows a lot. It turns out a lot of people, a lot of industries, a lot of businesses actually live in those areas where the sun shines a lot. And we can transition much quicker to an electrified economy based on renewable energy in those areas. And, yes, places in southwestern Pennsylvania may rely on fracked gas a little bit longer, may rely on coal just a little bit longer than those other areas that already have those resources where, you can put solar panels there, you can put solar plants there and wind turbines up and really exploit tidal energy and offshore wind as well as onshore wind. We have to be looking at this as a transition, and where do we start and how do we get the biggest bang for the buck quickly? Because everyone knows we've got to move quickly to reduce emissions of carbon dioxide and methane. We have to cut emissions down about 50% by the end of this decade. And this is what the science tells us. This is not a political statement or an ideologic position that I hold. It's based in science and physics. And we have to get all the way down to zero by the middle of this century, which really isn't that far off. By 2050, I intend to be kicking around in an old folks' home. You'll be at the prime of your career. And that's the thing 2050 is not that far off. It comes pretty quickly. You can take it from me, Dylan. So we need to really address these solutions in a common sense way. Doesn't have to happen all at this moment, and it doesn't have to happen all the same way everywhere.
In terms of statistics, what percentage would you say of carbon emissions are caused by human activity?
Well, I'm not going to give you a percentage. I will tell you that the vast majority of carbon emissions that are contributing to this episode of climate change, the vast majority are caused by human activities, whether it is our activities producing greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane in excess of what we usually experience, or the way we use our land to grow our food, or the way we transport ourselves, the way we power our appliances and this computer that I'm using, or heat the house to make it comfortable. The vast majority of what is driving, again, this particular episode of climate change is due to human. There's no question that it's due to human activities.
Is this really an issue that will be solved by, communicating our priorities more clearly? And I understand that Paris Climate Agreement is one of the initiatives to bring all of the countries together to actually address this issue and form that unity. So I suppose there's two parts to that. Do you think that this is a priorities issue? And second, how specifically does something like the Paris Climate Accords actually help bring those countries together?
Every person, every corporation, every government has to do everything that they can to help solve this problem. Some people will come to the table a little bit later. Some people will come a little bit earlier. I will submit that the earlier we get on board and we do the things that we need to do to move beyond fossil fuels and to renewable energy, to regenerative agriculture, to better ways to move ourselves around, the more opportunity we're gonna have for our economy, for our health, and really for everything that we value and for our children's future. So, I think that we have to look at it as an opportunity, really. If China's not ready to come on board, and I would also question that because I think they are ahead of us in the amount of renewable energy that they have deployed compared to the United States. But this, we can see it as an advantage. They're going to be playing catch up, and we are going to be able to create the renewable energy solutions and then export it to places like China. Right now, we're getting solar panels from China. Why is that? It makes no sense at all. We should be creating American jobs for what we need, and what we need, again, is what the science tells us. We need to stop extracting and burning fossil fuels. And make other arrangements for our energy and transportation and food growing and material needs.
Kind of bouncing off of that, what do you think is more effective in terms of addressing climate change and reducing carbon emissions? Because, of course, we have different levels of it. We have the legislative efforts, and then we also have what private corporations are trying to do. And then we have, like we were talking about, small individual behaviors. So, for example, like banning fracking on the federal level, and then the next step down would be, corporations saying that they'll be carbon neutral by 2040 by moving to electric vehicles. And then, like you said, on an individual level, perhaps someone choosing to become vegan or, being very environmentally conscious. So do you think all of those are equally important, or which of those do you think needs the most attention right now?
I think it's all of the above. I think all of that is important. I think, and they're important for different ways. From an individual level, I think it's important to be conscious of what the problem is, to admit that we have a problem, which some people just refuse to admit the reality. And I would suggest that people that think climate change is a hoax or are dismissive of climate change as a problem should actually spend some time reading a little bit of the science to understand it. The science is not that difficult. It's been known for over 150 years. We all learned some aspect of it in grade school. Really, grade school science will explain it to people. So on an individual level, we have to accept that there's a problem and understand it, and understand what we can do to make it better. And there are a ton of things that we can do as individuals to improve the situation. It's not going to fix. If we all became vegan tomorrow, it's not going to fix the problem. If we all drove electric vehicles tomorrow, that's not going to fix the problem. But every little bit helps. And it's not like we all have to, go nuts about it. But honestly, Dylan, if all of us could, conserve a little bit more energy, could make sure our houses are insulated, maybe, lower the thermostat a little bit in the winter and, raise it a little bit in the summer. If we could, maybe eat a little bit less red meat. I'm not saying no burgers, but maybe less burgers. If we could do a lot of little things, it would add up. Again, not to solve the problem, but it would make a dent. About 100 companies globally account for about 70% of greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a lot that those companies can do, again, to make other arrangements for how they do business, for how they make profits, for how they employ people, and for the types of businesses that they are involved with. I think as long as the Exxon Mobils and the BPs and the Shell oil and gas companies continue to resist this movement toward renewables, and not be the companies that can be part of the solution, the longer this is going to take to solve the problem, because they are huge contributors to greenhouse gas production and climate change. And then you go to the government level. There's an awful lot that this government can do, this democracy can do, this representative democracy can do to improve the situation, to push businesses and industry in one direction, to stop subsidizing the dirty industries and the oil companies, to promote the solutions that we need in agriculture and transportation and materials, getting away from plastic and to more sustainable materials, and to electricity production. So there's a lot that at least this government can do. I think all governments do have those choices, but it's really, in this country, it's really the people that should force those choices. And then you look at the international. You asked me before about the Paris Agreement, and I didn't really answer that. But the Paris Agreement, again, is an international governmental approach to getting everybody on board and pushing in the same direction to get to the goal of lowered carbon emissions, lower greenhouse gas emissions, and better health, more stable economies, and a brighter future for our children and grandchildren.
I want to get your opinion on the Green New Deal, which is one of these proposed pieces of legislation that would attempt to accomplish everything that we're talking about. I'm just curious to get your general opinion of that legislation.
The Green New Deal is not a policy. It's just a proposal. And it's a proposal, again, to address climate change with an all-of-the-above approach. So looking at the individual level, looking at the corporate level, looking at the government level, both local government, state government, federal government, and then taking those ideas with the goal not only of lowering greenhouse gas emissions, which is, again, what we need to do, but doing it in a way that's fair to Americans. It's fair to taxpayers. It's fair to residents living in big cities or small towns or rural areas, and is racially sensitive, which we're not very good at in this country, but we need to understand that we're all in this together, and we all need to pick ourselves up and move things along together. We can't leave people behind. So it's the Green New Deal is a broad proposal, and it addresses a lot of problems, other major problems that maybe Senator Ossoff is talking about that also need to be addressed. The economy needs to be addressed. The wealth inequality in this country is ridiculously high, and it's only getting worse, and that has to change. The racial inequities, the economic inequities that have occurred in this country in the last 40 years has just gotten much worse. That needs to be addressed. The dichotomy between rural and urban, these so-called flyover areas of the country. It's our country. All of it is our country, and all of it needs to be respected and nurtured in order for us to be one united country. So the Green New Deal really addresses all of that. It addresses looking at areas like here in southwestern Pennsylvania and the rest of Appalachia that has been the driver of fossil fuels, of fossil fuel extraction, and of industries that use fossil fuels. These areas are economically impacted in a detrimental way. They've been for many decades. These are the areas here in Appalachia that need the support. They need the programs to bring job training to areas that have been affected by coal mining and by fracking, by steel making. These towns and these rural areas especially have been really hard hit economically, not just in the last 4 years, but in the last 4 decades. They need relief. The good news is we have a lot of education, a lot of colleges and universities in Appalachia, a lot of we have the workforce here, we have the energy know-how. People here know how to work. They know how to unionize and organize. This is the area where you want to bring in the infrastructure. You want to bring in the solar plants. You want to bring in the factories that create wind turbines. That you want to get the farmland. There's a lot of farms here. Get them into regenerative agriculture so that we can restore our soil and allow our healthy soils to sequester carbon from the air back into the soil. So the opportunities are there. There are gas patch communities and oil patch communities all over the country that could really use attention from politicians to understand that we have the solutions and we have the workforce to do it. We may need a little bit of training. We may need a little bit of a push. The people will need support, but we can get this done. But the government needs to provide that support. And finally, we need to take it on the road to other countries. This is what we can do here. Other countries can do it too, but they're not going to believe that they can do it unless they see us doing it. And unfortunately, this country has kind of fallen down, and we're having a hard time getting up again. But I do believe that we will get up again, and we will show the world that this can be done, and we're all in it together.
Of course, there are many people working in these industries, so there would, of course, need to be this massive push to retrain these workers to work in renewable energy. So do you think there needs to be a large investment to help retrain all of the workers? Because like we had John Kerry saying, all of these people that were laid off from the pipeline can just learn to build solar panels And I feel like it's easy for him to say that, but should the federal government actually propose some funding and say, like, look, we will pay to retrain you so that you can, and it's just like you said before, instead of getting solar panels from China, that should be jobs that American workers are fulfilling. So what sort of solution do you see addressing the potential displacement of the workers in these industries?
Yeah, it has to be part of the solution to make sure that our fellow Americans aren't left behind. Because you know what, those pipe layers, they're going to lose their jobs. The frackers here in southwestern Pennsylvania, there aren't that many of them, actually, not as many as the industry says. But you know, there are thousands of them. And if we say that we're going to move beyond fracking, then these people who are currently in jobs that pay pretty well, they're going to need a little bit of love from the rest of us, Americans. They're going to need attention. You know, we're not real good at that in this country and looking out for others. I'm sorry to say that, but we're not. We need to get better at that. We need to recognize exactly what you're saying, is that people will lose their jobs. There needs to be a safety net to catch them, to make sure they continue to be able to insure their families against health problems, for example, that they continue to make rent. But yes, they need to be given opportunities to find other jobs that are also well-paying, jobs that are safer for themselves and their families and their neighbors, and jobs that fix the problem of climate change. So yes, and that's going to require a major investment from the country. The country is going to have to invest in people that we may not know, that we may not even live near these, you know, gas patch communities or these old coal mining towns. But we really need. That's part of the solution. That's part of what the Green New Deal talks about, is not leaving people behind, and that's going to be need a major investment.
So to wrap up everything, if you had one takeaway for everyone who is listening, perhaps it's different behaviors they can try that can contribute to this larger effort, or maybe it is educating themselves or listening to conversations or people who are very knowledgeable on this issue like you are. What would you say is a takeaway for everyone listening that could kind of boost the level of awareness around this issue so that we can make progress?
I think my message to everybody would be, first of all, let's take a deep breath. This has been a very difficult year. A lot of us have been, cramped inside our homes. It's actually separated us more from nature, many of us, and we need to find a way to reconnect with the natural world, because I think by doing that, by breathing fresh air, by seeing trees, by seeing blue sky, by feeling nature, I think that helps us understand the crisis that we're in. I also think that it's important for people to learn more about climate change. Again, the science is not that difficult, the basic science that explains it. And then it's really important to talk to each other about it. You know, everything in this country seems to be politicized nowadays. This is not a political issue. It's an issue about physics and science and health. It's not political. So I think people need to overcome that and really talk to their friends and family members and neighbors about climate change, and talk about the little steps that each of us can take, but also the bigger steps that every election counts, and we need to make sure that we all vote and have access to voting. The other thing is, I think it's important really to understand that when we solve the climate crisis, we improve public health. Fossil fuel burning is dangerous to our health. It produces toxic emissions that kill almost, air pollution kills almost 9 million people globally prematurely. And in the United States, hundreds of thousands of people die prematurely as a result of their exposure to air pollution, which is almost all due to the burning of fossil fuels. So we have to move beyond fossil fuels. We have to move beyond fracking. I'm not even saying ban fracking. I'm saying we need to just move beyond. We can't afford to be to continue to do fracking. We need to move beyond it. And we have solutions. So, that's really it in a nutshell. If we can move beyond, we can improve our air quality. We can improve our food supply. Americans are not the healthiest people. About 70%, 75% even, of American adults are either overweight or obese. Think about that for a second. The number in children is about 40%. About 40% of children in the United States are overweight or obese. That's astounding, and that is, certainly air pollution seems to contribute to that. Rise in obesity, but certainly the food supply and how we feed ourselves and the nutritional value that's gone down in our food supply needs to be addressed. And with regenerative agriculture and more attention on real food instead of factory processed food, we can really help make a dent. We can also understand that fossil fuels pollutes the water. And we all need fresh water, pure water, in order to survive, and all life forms do. So that will improve our health too. And I guess the one last thing is every person who witnesses environmental degradation and destruction and sees the suffering that causes in people, whether they're damaged by pollution, whether they're forced out of their homes and their communities because of an extreme weather event that's being driven by climate change. Every person who witnesses that experiences a mental health impact, a negative mental health impact. And we shouldn't forget that affects our own health and well-being. And improving environmental health will certainly improve our psychic health and our physical health. So it really is important for us to really come together, understand what's important here, which is basically the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat, and what that means, what a healthy environment means to our children and to generations that haven't been born yet, and that really improves their outlook, their prognosis, if we can clean things up and move toward a renewable and more sustainable future.
It's very well said. And again, I greatly appreciate you taking the time to talk about this with me today. And I hope that others can also benefit from hearing our conversation. So again, thank you so much for being here, and be well.
Thank you, Dylan. I enjoyed it. You be well too.